things going to land after this, and also, what has happened in the midst of it. So we've seen more engagement on social media in some ways, whether it's through Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or especially TikTok. So these things, I think, innately gained momentum in these times just because we've been on lockdown. Will that momentum continue afterwards? I would hope not. Just because I find myself getting pulled to my screen way too often. I've taken breaks, but there's definitely an addiction for stimulus at this point, because really we're like in this one big waiting room, especially in California. But we're in this one big waiting room in lockdown, and there's like a invisible enemy. So we're always kind of on edge, right? So there's this, it's so difficult. There's so many things to analyze here. The mentality around the virus, and the science, the stats, what's real and what's not. Ultimately, we're, in my opinion, and this might seem crazy, but we're in a state of mass hysteria, as far as whether it's denial, whether it's as far as denial of science, or everything is just extreme at this point. What is what? It's all distorted, and for me, I don't really know who's to blame for that or what, but my concern more is what is happening to our minds, and how are we going to recover from this after this pandemic? Are we going to be the same as before? Well, in some ways, I hope not. I hope we've learned a lot and taken the time to reflect on things. There's a bunch of important events that happened during this pandemic, and I hope it makes us better people in the end. But that's wishful thinking too. Some of us are going to come out extra bitter, extra lonely. This, in some ways we've isolated our worldview, or we've become isolated by our worldview. We've created a narrative that won't allow us to interact in a way that is functional or positive, or the world isn't a beautiful place all the time, but when we create a narrative that won't allow us to see any beauty in it, that's the real difficulty. And I found myself struggling with that, and I've seen others too. So those are things that when I think about the dance world specifically, that is really just a general thought. But when it comes to the dance world specifically, these general things come back to it, how we're processing things. But I don't know when this thing ends, and there's just so much behind that. When the actual virus disappears, maybe never, right? Or when the new strains don't go away, this is just a part of nature, and it's a part of our reality. And as messed up as it is, in some ways mentally, we can't always control our environment, but we can control how we respond to it. And I just don't think the isolation is sustainable. So whatever that means. So as far as the dance world, I think there's things that we should be doing as of right now, using this time in isolation or quarantine to really kind of pivot and do our best to make use of the platforms that we have. Some people have been able to do that immaculately during this time. and some others have just taken a break from social media, and to each their own. Um, so when it comes back, when things come back to in-person exchanges, it's going to be a beautiful thing. I dream of those days. In some ways, I start to have some of those days still, just in very small groups with close friends, and I encourage y'all to do the same. In some ways, I think of friendships, relationships, dance as essential. We talk about essential workers, but like, what is essential for your well-being as well? And how do you sustain yourself in these times? The dance world post-pandemic, whether it's theater shows or whether it's social media based, I think right now the social media has expanded the platform, but the information is still struggling. Like solid. I don't want to say like the history, the depth of the art form hasn't been widespread, right? And with social media, even though it's expanded, like the more people are dancing, I think more people are doing trendy dances and stuff like that. And I can't wait to get out into the clubs and see who's dancing these days. Maybe there's gonna be more dance. Maybe there's gonna be more people on the dance floor, more people creating, more people just based off of TikTok. You see some of these people and they're just starting out dancing, and it's because they're isolated, and so there are pros and cons to this. And I think ultimately when we get out of this, it's going to be a beautiful time. It's going to be, if things economically stay viable, then I think this may be the best time to be alive. I've kind of said this before, but I believe we're in an era of cult mentality, which is kind of a scary thing, but it's also not a bad thing. I think these, in my kind of opinion, and when I researched religions in college and psychology, just like my theory, I think that there's these cult eras that happen throughout time. There's certain cultural environments, certain societal pressures that create cult-like mentality among the masses. And it's not like everybody's a cult for this one thing, but they split off into all these different cults, right? And cult has a negative connotation, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you look up the definition of cult, it doesn't necessarily mean bad, right? Everybody that calls something a cult perceives it as bad because it's different from their own beliefs, but cult is just to be different, right? But the cool thing is that I see these communities building. I feel like this time is much like the 60s, protests and reformation and this kind of the youth standing up, educating themselves, free spirits. In some ways I feel like this is a revolutionary time, and we've been in lockdown, so it's all been through the internet, and eventually it's going to thrust itself into the real world. And I think after this, you're going to have the 70s again. You're going to have funk, you're going to have disco, you're going to have parties, you're going to have concerts, you're going to have Woodstock. I think that's what's going to happen. But these are all just thoughts, and I'm really just thinking off the cuff here. But shout out to Mad Lions for this question. I'm curious to where you guys think this is all going, where it's going to end up, and maybe even suggestions on what we can do now to get prepared for building a better future for this art that we do, this dance that we do, the history, the culture that we come from, and how can we just create a more enriching experience in this time that we have on this earth, you know.